The village of Umocha buzzed with whispers as Adan walked past, her baby strapped tightly to her back. But this was no ordinary sight. The child wasn't cradled upright like other babies. His tiny head dangled upside down, his legs pointing toward the sky, wrapped securely in bright red cloth. His small arms swayed limply with each step she took, his face hidden against her back. Gasps followed her. Children pointed. Women clutched their own babies tighter, as if afraid the strange sight would curse them. Adan, what madness is this? Mamankoli, the oldest woman in the village, blocked her path, her wrinkled face twisted in horror. Why are you carrying your child like a sack of yams? Have you lost your senses? Adan didn't stop. She adjusted the wrappers holding her son in place and kept walking, her voice calm but firm. He's safe this way. The whispers grew louder. Maybe the child is not human, one woman muttered. Perhaps it's a spirit, another hissed. But Adan ignored them all, her heart steady even as her shoulders ached from the weight of her secret. No one knew the truth. No one knew why Adan carried her baby upside down. Before you read on, don't forget to like this story, comment with your thoughts, and subscribe to our channel for more gripping tales. Your support helps us grow. Thank you. Years earlier, Adan had been a young bride, full of hope. She married Emeka at 18, her waist slender, her laughter bright. For the first year, their home was filled with love. But as the seasons passed and her belly remained flat, the warmth in Emeka's eyes turned cold. Is she a woman or a stone? His mother sneered at family gatherings. Even the barren fig tree bears fruit once in a lifetime, Adan prayed. She fasted. She visited healers and drank bitter herbs until her stomach cramped. And then, after 6 long years, she finally conceived. The village rejoiced when her son was born, until he died 2 weeks later, his tiny body cold before sunrise. Don't weep too much, Emeka said, his voice hollow. At least we know you can conceive. So they tried again and again. Each time, a son was born. Each time, death came stealing. 7 little graves lay behind their hut, each marked with a small stone. 7 times Adan's arms had cradled lifeless children. 7 times her heart had shattered. Then came the final betrayal. One evening, a strange woman arrived at their home, a healthy boy clinging to her hand. Emeka stood tall, his voice firm. She is my new wife. You must leave. Adan packed her things in silence, her tears falling onto the wrappers that had once swaddled her lost babies. She returned to her father's house, her shame heavier than any burden. But fate wasn't done with her. A new man, Chinedu, saw past her sorrow. He married her quietly, without questions. And when she conceived again, hope flickered, weak but stubborn. Yet Adan knew better than to trust joy. When her 8th son was born, she did something no one understood. She carried him upside down. The first time Chinedu saw Adan tying their newborn son upside down to her back, his hands froze mid-air. The baby's tiny legs kicked slightly as she secured the red cloth tightly around him, his head dangling dangerously close to her waist. Adan, what are you doing? Chinedu's voice was low, confused. She didn't look up. This is how he stays alive. Chinedu wanted to argue. He wanted to pull his son free, to cradle him the right way like fathers did in the village. But the look in Adan's eyes stopped him, a mix of desperation and something deeper, something like fear. So he said nothing. The village, however, had plenty to say. Have you seen how she carries that child? The women whispered at the stream, their voices carrying over the rushing water. It's an abomination. Maybe the baby is sick, one suggested. Or maybe it's not a baby at all, another hissed. Children ran behind Adan whenever she walked to the market, giggling and pointing. Look! The upside-down baby! Adan ignored them all. She walked with her head high, her son pressed securely against her back, his face hidden from the world. Only her stepmother knew the truth. One night, under the dim glow of a kerosene lamp, Adan finally spoke. The old man in the far village said this is the only way, she whispered, her fingers tracing the red cloth wrapped around her sleeping son. If I carry him like other women do, the spirits will take him too. Her stepmother, Neka, nodded slowly. She had been the one to take Adan to the herbalist after the 7th child died. She had heard the prophecy herself. 10 years, Neka murmured. 10 years of this, and he will be safe. Adan's hands trembled. 10 years of whispers, 10 years of sideways glances, 10 years of carrying her child like a curse. But she would do it. She would do anything to keep this one alive. Then came the fever. It started small, just a warmth on the baby's skin when Adan bathed him. But by nightfall, his tiny body was burning, his breaths coming in short, sharp gasps. Adan's heart pounded. This was how it always began. She tore through the village in the dark, her son still tied upside down to her back, his weak cries muffled against her body. She didn't stop until she reached the herbalist's hut. The old man took one look at the child and hissed, "You let someone touch him?" Adan shook her head wildly. "No, no one has—" But then she remembered. Just that morning, Pastor Gideon had stopped her on the road. "Sister Adan," he had said, his voice dripping with pity, "let me pray for this child." Before she could refuse, his hand had landed on her son's head. Only for a second. But a second was enough. The herbalist's hut smelled of dried roots and burning herbs as Adan stood frozen, her son's feverish body still tied upside down against her back. The old man's milky eyes narrowed as he reached into a clay pot, pulling out a blackened chicken feather and a small gourd of thick, dark liquid. "You fool," he hissed, stirring the mixture violently. One touch from an outsider's hand, and the spirits smell his life like fresh meat. Adan's knees buckled. She had been so careful. No visitors, no prayers from strangers, no hands on her child except her own. But one moment of hesitation, 1 second of letting Pastor Gideon's fingers brush her son's head, and now the baby whimpered, his tiny body shuddering. His skin had taken on a sickly gray hue, his breaths shallow as a dying bird's. The herbalist grabbed Adan's wrist with surprising strength. "Cut his hair," he demanded, thrusting a rusty blade into her hand. "All of it. Burn every strand." With trembling fingers, Adan untied the red cloth just enough to expose the baby's sweat-slicked scalp. As the first lock of hair fell, the child let out a piercing scream. Not the cry of an infant, but a sound that raised the hairs on Adan's arms. It echoed through the hut like something far older than a newborn. Outside, thunder cracked despite the dry season. Neka burst through the door, her face ashen. "The village, they're gathering outside. They say the child's cries are calling evil spirits." Adan worked faster, shearing the last curls as the herbalist painted the baby's scalp with the foul-smelling paste. The moment the final stroke was applied, the child fell silent. His fever broke so suddenly that frost formed on Adan's fingertips where she touched him. The old man sagged in relief. 3 days, he panted. For 3 days and nights, you must not sleep. Keep him upside down. Walk him through the compound every hour. If you stop, if you rest. He didn't need to finish. The 7 small graves behind Adan's old home said enough. As Adan retied the red cloth with renewed determination, the first rock crashed through the herbalist's window. "Give us the demon child!" a voice shouted from the mob outside, Pastor Gideon's voice. The mob's torches cast jagged shadows across the herbalist's hut as Adan pressed her son tighter against her back. The upside-down baby had gone eerily still, his frost-coated limbs stiff beneath the red wrappers. "Burn the hut!" someone screamed. "Let the spirits take what belongs to them." Neka barred the door with her body, her voice cutting through the chaos. "Fools! That child has done nothing." Pastor Gideon pushed to the front, his white robes glowing in the firelight. "That is no child," he declared, holding up the single strand of hair Adan had missed, a hair that now twisted like a live worm between his fingers. "This is an ogbanje, a spirit child sent to drain this family's life." Adan's breath caught. She remembered the herbalist's warning. Burn every strand. The missing hair pulsed in Gideon's grip as the villagers gasped. Then, a sound like cracking bone. The pastor's eyes flew wide as the hair strand burrowed into his palm. Blood bloomed where it vanished beneath his skin, traveling up his arm in a grotesque bulge beneath the flesh. Screams erupted as Gideon collapsed, his body convulsing. His right arm twisted at impossible angles, fingers snapping backward one by one with wet pops. The mob scattered like scared goats. In the sudden silence, the herbalist grabbed Adan's shoulder. Run. Now to the sacred cornfield, where your ancestors are buried. Moonlight bled through the cornstalks as Adan stumbled between the graves of her family. The baby stirred for the first time in hours, his tiny fingers brushing her spine. Then the whispers began. Sister, we see you. Adan whirled around. The corn leaves rustled with no wind. Shadows moved between the stalks, small shapes with two long limbs. Her son let out a gurgling laugh. The herbalist's voice came from everywhere at once. They've come for what was promised to them, 7 taken, 7 owed. A cold hand grasped Adan's ankle. She looked down. A child-sized skeleton, its bones blackened by grave soil, was crawling up her leg. Its jaw unhinged with a sound like tearing parchment. Mama, you forgot me. Adan's scream lodged in her throat as the skeletal fingers dug into her calf. The thing clinging to her leg had her firstborn's birthmark, 3 tiny dots above its left elbow, just like the baby she'd buried 12 years ago. Mama, you wrapped me wrong, the corpse child whispered, its voice the sound of termites chewing wood. Cornstalks trembled around them as 6 more small shapes emerged. Each bore fragments of the burial cloths Adan had used, the yellow ankara for Uche, the white handkerchief for little Obi. The 7th grave stood empty, its soil freshly disturbed. The upside-down baby on Adan's back suddenly thrashed, his laughter turning to shrieks as the skeletal children advanced. His tiny hands clawed at the red wrapper, not to escape, but to reach for them. The herbalist's gourd shattered against the ancestral shrine. The bargain, he roared. A memory tore through Adan's panic. The midnight ritual after her 3rd son's death. The whispered promise to the earth. Take this one, but let the next stay. She'd repeated it 7 times, never realizing she was negotiating. Now the spirits came to collect. The first corpse child lunged, not at Adan, but at the living baby strapped to her. Its bone fingers closed around the red cloth as the other 6 began chanting, 7 seeds planted, 7 fruits owed. Adan grabbed her grandmother's rusted hoe from the shrine. With a cry that ripped her throat raw, she swung. The blade passed clean through the tiny skeleton like mist. The 7th grave yawned open at her feet. The skeletal fingers had just begun to untie the red wrapper when Adan did the unthinkable. She laughed. A broken, jagged sound tore from her throat as she yanked the knife from her waistband, not toward the spirits, not toward the grave, but to her own wrist. Take me, she hissed, slicing deep. Blood splattered across the 7th grave like hot rain. You want 7? I've buried 6 sons. Tonight makes 7. She thrust her bleeding arm toward the corpse children. But this one, she jerked her chin at the baby on her back, is mine. The cornfield fell silent. Then the earth began to shake. The upside-down baby suddenly spun in his wrappings, not by Adan's hand, but by some unseen force, until he faced forward for the first time in his life. His eyes flew open. They were solid black. Foolish mother, the baby spoke in a voice like grinding stones. You carried me this way so death wouldn't recognize me. But you forgot. The red wrapper unraveled itself, revealing what Adan had never let the village see. 2 jagged scars running down the baby's back where wings should have been. The baby's black eyes gleamed as the red wrapper fell away completely. Adan staggered back, her blood still dripping into the hungry earth. The 7 skeletal children began to merge together, their bones clicking and snapping like falling dominoes until they formed one terrible figure, tall, with skin like burnt bark and eyes that held entire storms. You made a promise to the earth, the figure boomed, its voice shaking the cornfield. 6 sons given freely, the 7th owed. Adan's breath came in ragged gasps. She had thought the deaths were misfortune, bad luck, a curse. But now she understood. She had unknowingly entered a bargain with something ancient, something that had been waiting. The baby on her back began to change. His skin darkened, his limbs elongating until he was no longer an infant, but a shadowy reflection of the being before her. "I am the last," the not-child whispered, "the one who would tip the scales." Adan's hands shook, but her voice did not. "No." She reached back and grabbed the child, her child, by the arm. "You took 6, but this one is mine." The earth rumbled. The being's form flickered, its power wavering. Adan had done the one thing the spirits never expected. She had refused to grieve. She had carried her last son upside down, not just to hide him from death, but to hide him from fate itself. The figure snarled, its form beginning to dissolve. "The bargain is broken." Adan held her son tighter as the first light of dawn broke over the cornfield. The graves were gone, the whispers silenced. But the scars on her child's back remained. The morning sun burned away the last shadows as Adan stood in the empty cornfield, her now silent son heavy in her arms. For the first time in 10 years, she turned him upright and nearly dropped him. 2 dark scars ran down his back, where no scars had been the night before. "Mama?" His voice was small, human. "Why are you crying?" Adan touched her cheeks. She hadn't even realized. The village never understood. When Adan returned carrying her son the right way up, the whispers only grew louder. "Maybe the madness left her," the women said at the market. "Or maybe the spirit finished its work," others muttered. But the boy, now called Ndubwisi, life's justice, grew stronger each day. The scars on his back never faded, but they never opened either. Years later, when Ndubwisi had children of his own, the village elders would tell the story in hushed tones. "She outsmarted death itself, that one, carried her son upside down until the universe forgot it was owed a soul." And on quiet nights, when the wind rustled through the cornfields, Adan would press her ear to her grown son's back, listening, just in case. The years folded over Umwocha like layers of old cloth, softening the sharp edges of memory. Ndubwisi, now a man with his father's quiet strength and his mother's watchful eyes, worked the yam fields under a sun that no longer felt like it was judging him. The village had accepted him, mostly. The children who once ran from him now brought their own babies for him to bless, a twisted sort of reverence for the man who'd survived what no one understood. But when the Harmattan winds blew dry and sharp from the north, the elders would still cross themselves as he passed, their lips moving in silent prayer. Adan, her back bent from decades of carrying invisible weights, watched her son from the shade of the iroko tree. The scars on his back had never faded, though they'd long stopped weeping the black smoke she'd seen that night in the cornfield. She'd told no one, not even Chinedu, about the way those scars sometimes hummed in the dark, a sound like faraway drums, felt more than heard. Then the rains came late. At first it was just a dryness in the wells, a restlessness among the goats. But when little Adais, the blacksmith's daughter, fell sick with a fever that turned her eyes milk-white, the village turned as one toward Ndubwisi's compound. They came with offerings, kola nuts, palm wine, a live chicken tied with red string. "You know this sickness," the blacksmith said, not pleading, not accusing, just stating a fact. Ndubwisi knelt beside the girl's mat. The moment his shadow touched her, the child's back arched off the ground, her mouth opening in a silent scream. Beneath her sleeping wrapper, 2 raised lines began to form between her shoulder blades, fresh scars mirroring his own. Adan lunged forward, knocking the calabash of water from the blacksmith's hands. "No," she hissed, her voice cracking like firewood. "Not again." But the drums in Ndubwisi's scars grew louder, shaking the bones of the earth. The first wing tore through Adaisi's skin at sunset. It wasn't the delicate, feathered thing of angels. It was leathery and too long, the color of a bruise, twitching as it unfurled. The second followed with a wet snap, sending the villagers scrambling back. The girl rose without waking, her new wings beating once, twice, then she was gone, a dark streak against the bleeding sky. And Dubuisi collapsed, his own scars splitting open at last. Not to release wings, but to swallow. The ground beneath him turned black, drinking in the shadows pooling from his body. "They're calling the debt," Adan whispered, clutching his shuddering form. That night, 7 graves behind the abandoned hut cracked open. Not to release spirits this time, but to return them. One by one, the children Adan had buried clawed their way to the surface, their bones knitting together as they walked. Their eyes were no longer hollow, their voices no longer hissed. They came to the compound not as corpses, but as living, breathing boys, each exactly the age they'd been when the earth took them. The youngest, Somadina, still had mud clinging to his lashes as he reached for Adan. "Mama," he said, and the word was a key turning in a rusted lock. But Ndubuisi was changing. His skin darkened to the blue-black of midnight, his limbs stretching, his scars blooming into something vast and terrible. The spirits hadn't come for revenge, they'd come to crown him. Adan understood then. The upside-down carrying, the red wrappers, the scars, none of it had been to hide her son from death. It had been to hide death from the world. Ndubuisi, no, the thing he was becoming, spoke with all their voices at once. "You bargained 6 for 1, but a mother's love doesn't divide, it multiplies." The resurrected children circled Adan, their small hands pressing against her back, her arms, her face. Not to harm, to remember. When dawn came, the village found Adan alone in the compound, her hands stained with soil. The graves were empty, the scars on her son's back had sealed into smooth, unbroken skin, and high above, where the horizon met the sky, 7 dark shapes flew in perfect formation, not away, but waiting.